Hi, I'm Eileen, a Godsteiner at Jacobson, and I was born October 4th, 1928. And I'm here to tell you my story of when I was a little girl and up until about the age, I imagine, of 2021. So, where do I start? I don't know.
Tell
It's
me
a long
about your
story.
mother and dad.
Okay, I'd like to talk about my mother and dad. I had wonderful, wonderful parents. They were always involved in my life. They were very conscientious in their work and their work ethic and their raising their children. And they 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 were just great, great people.
Were they born in this country, Eileen?
No, they were born in Russia. My father came to this country when he was, I suppose 10 or 12. My mother came with her mother when she was 6.
How did they happen to come to this part of the country?
Well, they just put them on a train.
Did they have
back
any
then in
relatives
those
here?
days. No, they had no relatives, but they just felt that they had to have more population in Nebraska. So they just shipped them to Nebraska. It
Were they
was-
married before they got here?
No, they were
They
not
met.
married.
Did they meet here?
They met in this country, in Omaha. My father went to elementary school, I imagine. It must have been about the 8th grade. I'm a little hazy on these things because I should have questioned them, but as we were talking, I had no interest at that time, or little interest, I should say. And my mother completed high school, and she went on to, I always remember this, to a Boyles College, and learned to become a stenographer. And she worked at Union Pacific at that time, and she was always very proud of that she completed that education of becoming a stenographer, a secretary, whatever they called them in those days. And but my father went to work, I suppose at the age of 12 or 14, to support the family. He came from a large family of maybe 8 children. Of those 8, 6 were probably natural siblings, and 2 or 3 were stepbrothers and sisters, because his father remarried. His wife passed away at an early age, so he remarried, and with his second wife he had 2 or 3 children. So they were a very large family, and they all had to work to contribute to the family coffer. They all had to bring in money,
You said that your mother came over with her mother.
with her mother.
Anyone else in that family?
No, her husband, my mother's father, believe it or not, I don't know when he came over. He was a pharmacist of sorts, and made perfumes. I see, it's all very hazy. I don't even know all these facts, but that always struck me as being sort of interesting.
And how about your father? Did any of his family come over at the time?
They all came at various times. I mean, they had to save up money, and then they brought one over, and then they saved up more money, and they brought another, and so forth, until most of them came here, and some passed away over there. I don't know numbers. So that's how that was. It was I mean, it must have been a very hard existence in those days. You know, when I was young, I took it at face value. But now I'm thinking about it, you know, and I think, well, how did they manage that? How did they cope with all that adversity?
Did you have a lot of relatives then on both sides, your mother's side and dad's side?
Well, there were more relatives on my dad's side, but the family being split, there was never much communication. And my mother had only one stepbrother from my grandmother's, had two other marriages. Both of her husbands passed away in Russia, in the old country they called it. So she had a stepbrother who was 13 years older than she, and he was from my grandmother's second marriage.
Now,
He was very involved.
did they end up settling in Omaha or in Council Bluffs?
They all settled, I think, in Omaha.
Okay.
And then when my mother and father were married, this business opportunity presented itself in Council Bluffs, and they moved to Council Bluffs, this little grocery store.
Do you remember that little grocery store?
I remember that little grocery store. Now, he started out, my father started having the store with his father, and I believe one of his brothers, but it all split up, and then he had it alone. In Omaha, he had invested in what was known then the Central Market. I don't know where it was downtown, but I don't know who had it at that time. And they had invested quite a lot of money, and that went, I mean, they lost a lot of money in that. It wasn't a successful venture. It went broke.
Did he spend many years in the grocery business in Council Bluffs?
Oh, yes. My dad was in the grocery business, well, let's see, from the 20s, when I was born, 1928, until, past the flood in Council Bluffs. Was that in the 50s? Probably. And then he acquired 2 or 3 other stores, plus the store on West Broadway.
Were those stores also in Council Bluffs?
There was another store on Madison Avenue in Council Bluffs, and another store in North Omaha. So eventually he sold the stores on West Broadway and Madison Avenue in Council Bluffs, and retained the store in North Omaha for a number of years.
What are your memories of growing up at home as a young girl?
As a young girl, well, I was, it was just wonderful. It was ethereal. It was just great. You know, I suppose I was what they refer to now as a spoiled Jewish princess. And I had most everything I ever asked for or wanted. It was, let's see, the Depression was in the early 30s, I believe. But I never knew that we were wanting of anything. My parents were struggling, I'm sure, but they never let on that things weren't just wonderful. And I had, all kinds of lessons. I had piano lessons, and I had tap dancing and ballet, and I had every kind of lesson that you can possibly imagine. Drama lessons, horseback riding lessons, baton lessons, you know, where you twirl the baton. And I mean, I think my mother, you know, just wanted me to excel at something, you know, because she just pursued all of these avenues, I suppose, hoping that something would stick, you know. But it was great. It was really a wonderful childhood.
And then, how much older is your brother than you?
Yale is 6 years older than I. And my mother always said that he was such an erratic child and such a very difficult baby that it took her 6 years to want to think about having another one.
And how did you get along growing up with your brother, or was that a big age difference?
Well, there was quite an age difference. When I was in high school, he was already in university. So in a lot of ways, it was like being raised as an only child. Although he always acted as kind of the father figure toward me, he was always involved and wanted to know how I was doing. He was always interested.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you worked in the store. What were some of your jobs in the store?
Oh, in the grocery? Well, I just went down. I was just a general pest mostly, and you know, then they had the cookies in the big bulk. You know how they had them in the bulk and in big containers rather than packaged goods. So I'd be eating the cookies all day and just a general pest mostly. Mm-hmm.
Did you wait on customers?
Oh no, I just went.
You didn't
down.
graduate to that level.
I didn't graduate. No, they wouldn't let me do that. I just went down and kind of just mostly bothered everyone, you know. Mm-hmm.
When you look back, you know, we kind of marvel at how the work week is today versus then. Your father must have put in a lot of hours a week working, didn't he?
Oh, he did. He would work 20 hours a day. And then they had, before the meat processing and all, you know, he would kill chickens. I remember that so vividly. He would kill them in the back room. There was a big back room. And he would actually go back there and kill those chickens before dressing them out and putting them in the meat case. I mean, it was just kind of gross, but that's how it used to be. It's how they did it. And he just worked so hard and just to provide for his family.
Did you ever get to see that killing of the chickens?
Once I saw it.
Once was enough.
Once was enough. It was kind of just mind-boggling. Mm-hmm. But you know, I suppose they all realized that if they wanted to survive, these are the things that they had to do. And my father never complained about it. Just that's what they had to do.
Where did you start elementary school?
Well, it was an elementary school called Avenue B, and not a very original name. It was on Avenue B, on 26th and Avenue B, I believe, in Council Bluffs. It is no longer there. I mean, they've made apartments out of it. I mean, they tore it down and put apartments. And it went then up to the eighth grade. And it was you know, then it was from all walks of life. I mean, the children in the school were from all walks of life. And I remember there were some very poor children in that school. You know, their pants were tattered, and once, I think I was how old? Well, I was about in the third or fourth grade. Anyway, he actually had no shoes. You know, so they hustled him out in a hurry, and someone went out and bought him shoes. But this was shortly after the Depression. When I look back on it, I don't know the actual year, but it must have been in the 30s, and people were still recovering from the Depression. But that always stuck in my mind that this poor boy had to come to school without shoes.
Did you walk to school every day?
I walked to school in the winter. I think we lived about 6 blocks from the elementary school, and the snowdrifts used to be so high. I remember that. And I'd wear these Snuggies. They used to call them Snuggies, you know, all bundled up with those, and scarves and hats, and the wind was blowing, but you just walked to school.
And that was in the day when you walked to school and then you went home for lunch, wasn't it?
I went home, well, yes, I mean, most of the time. When it was a blizzard, I would take always the same lunch, a bologna sandwich, and there was something else in there. But that was lunch, you know, at school. I mean, prior to having a cafeterias, they didn't have cafeterias in those days. So mother would fix me a lunch, you know, but it was always, standard bologna sandwich. I remember that.
Do you remember some of your friends from that era?
Do I remember my friends? Oh, yes. I had a nice little group of friends. We lived in the west end of town, which was kind of considered the not-so-hot part of Council Bluffs. And all my friends lived up in the east part of town, which was considered the more elite. And we had, this was more in high school. We had a little sorority, you know.
This was high school?
This was high school. It was called MSL. And how many Jewish girls? There were about 10 Jewish girls. And I don't know, we met every week. I think, I don't know what the purpose of it was. I mean, it must have been just strictly social, just becoming kind of close, you know, getting together. And we had fun.
What high school was that?
That was Thomas Jefferson. There were only three Jewish children in that high school. Myself, Eleanor Passer, who became Eleanor Slosberg, and she and I were friends from maybe 5 years old until she passed away. I mean, she was my oldest friend.
And who was the third one?
I'm trying to think. Harold Abramson went for a time to school in Council Bluffs. I think he still lives in Omaha. And there was a Gerald Feblowitz. I don't know what happened to him. And he went to Thomas Jefferson. And we were the only Jewish children in the school of about, I imagine, I have no idea how many, maybe 1,200. But I always say that I was happy that I had this multicultural experience of living with all kinds of, children from all backgrounds. I think it makes you a better person, a more understanding person, rather than just all one religion or one, what am I trying to say, one financial, you know, they're all being, say, wealthy children, for example. Yeah.
And did you graduate from Thomas
I
Jefferson?
graduated from Thomas Jefferson in 1946. Mm-hmm.
And then where did you go?
Well, then I went, my parents took me as a graduation present. They took me to California for 6 weeks. And you know, that it was great. We had a wonderful time.
Did you go on to college after that?
Yes, I went a year and a half to the University of Iowa. and I pledged Sigma Delta Tau sorority, and I lived in the sorority house. And in those days, I mean, no one ever thought of studying or becoming anybody. You know, I just had a good time. And then when I ran out of boyfriends there, I transferred to the University of Nebraska for a half year. And so I actually went to school for two years. And then I remember telling my folks, you know, I'm wasting your money. You know, I'm not really interested in school, and I think I've had enough of that. And so they complied, because, you know, women then didn't aspire to careers and professions. I'm sure some did, but the majority, the object was to find a guy and get married and so on and so on. I mean, if you weren't married by 20, well, there was something wrong with you.
Those had to be fun times, though, weren't they?
Well, they were fun times. They were definitely fun times. I mean, totally irresponsible, and but I mean, I look back upon them as being just great times. I do. And I mean, I blended in with everyone else, because that was the way it was done then.
So it was good times, though.
Good times, absolutely. I don't remember ever having adversity in those days, or having problems, or it was just all just a good time. Mm-hmm.
Let's go back and talk a little bit. What were Jewish holidays like at home?
Jewish holidays. Well, not having a lot of family in those days. How do we do it? Oh, well, my mother had some cousins. She was related to the Fairs in Omaha, and who else was she related to? The Rosenblatts. And I think, as I recall, we would spend not only holidays, but on Sundays, every Sunday, when I was like, 8 or 10 years old, in that time frame, every Sunday the family would all meet, and the adults would sit around in like a circle, and they'd visit, and the children would all go outside to play. And that was how we always spent our Sunday afternoons. Now, there must have been a relative in there who my parents enjoyed being with, you know, who brought everyone together. But anyway, that's how everyone spent Sundays. Not isolated like now, you know, everyone just kind of sticks to their little a den and watches television and so on and so on. And as far as holidays are concerned, they really don't stand out in my mind until in later life, when I had children and Yale had children, and then we would all get together. But not so much growing up. I don't remember a lot about that.
Did your family eventually move to Omaha?
Did they move to Omaha? Yes, they did. When I think after that big flood they had in Council Bluffs, the flood in Council Bluffs, I think shortly after that, my parents moved to Omaha. I don't have much to report about that, because I was already living in California. So I'm just not quite sure about the time element. I think the flood was in the 50s.
Did your dad keep the store in Council Bluffs during this period?
I think he did, yes.
And he then opened a store in Omaha?
Then it was an existing store, and he must have bought someone out and concentrated his efforts in North Omaha, in that store.
So that was his only store at that time?
At that time, or shortly thereafter. I'm ashamed to say that I don't know the exact times of these things. They just kind of all go together.
But you had already moved on, and that's why, you know,
Yeah,
left the area.
I had left the area, and I had moved to California. So they built a home in the Dillon Fair Acres, they called it at the time, Dillon Fair Acres. And that was my mother's dream home, and she had her wish to move to Omaha. I think she always wanted to. And they lived in that home, probably for 20 years, or maybe longer. I just don't recall how long, but it was a lovely home, and they enjoyed that.
What can you tell me about your father, just the kind of person he was and so on?
My dad, well, he was a great guy. Looking back on it, he had a lot of ambition, and he wanted to succeed. And if it took him 24 hours a day, that's what he wanted. It meant everything to him. And he worked very hard. And in his business, you know, he was the boss. But like so many Jewish husbands at home, my mother was the boss. And I think they had a nice life together. I'm sure that they had their ups and downs, but one thing about my parents, they never complained to the children about anything, nothing, which maybe is kind of unrealistic. I don't know. I've often thought about that. You know, it was kind of like a false sense of well-being that I had, I know, and I suppose Yale too. I don't want to speak for him, but they just wanted everything to look fine for us. And, you know, when I think of my dad, I just think of working hard. Always working hard.
Was he able to come home and eat dinner with the family, or was that a two-shift thing?
Did he eat dinner? Oh, that's, no, what I remember, even in Council Bluffs when I was a child, he would come home for lunch. I suppose the store was about a mile and a half away from our home. And, you know, he'd come home for lunch, and he had his favorite television. This must have been at the time television was just coming out in the, I don't know, sometime around there. And he would spend about an hour and a half at home having lunch and just resting a little, and then going back to the store, and I suppose the store was open till 9, 10 o'clock. Mm-hmm.
Did he eat then when he came home at the end of the day?
I guess he did. I don't remember that. I don't remember. He probably did. But he mostly had, then he had lunch at home. And I remember always on Saturday, my grandmother, my mother's mother, who lived with us for maybe 20 years, she and I would walk to the grocery store because my grandmother wouldn't ride on a Saturday. So she and I would walk to the grocery store, and she had a little orange crate that she sat on, and her thing was to watch that nobody took anything. That was her job. And then my father would take me to this little a Greasy Spoon. It was 2 or 3 blocks away, and we would, Saturday night, we'd always have supper together. A dinner, I guess you'd call it. Saturday night dinner. Always, you know, the roast beef with lots of gravy and the mashed potatoes and that kind of thing.
You mentioned your grandmother. Do you remember much about her?
I do now. I think about her. Mm-hmm. we were talking about my grandmother, who was my mother's mother, and when her husband passed away, of course, that was before the days of the Dr. Share home, and I think the parents lived with the children. So my grandmother moved in with us. We had a third floor, and she had her room up there, and that was three generations in one house, which was pretty remarkable when I look back on it. And it wasn't always wonderful. I mean, my mother and my grandmother had their go-rounds, and but there was a lot of love there, and she helped. She made wonderful. Looking back on it, she was a wonderful baker. She would make those little round things. Those, I think they were knishes, and they had the sour cream in the middle or something like that. And then she would make dill pickles and in those big crocks. And then she would make strudel with the real authentic, thin dough. And she was a fabulous cook. And she helped with raising us, though she seemed to know when to back off, not to usurp my mother. And for that went on for 18 years, and somehow they all managed. And when my mother and my grandmother would have their discussions, my father would if my father was around, he would always step in and take my his mother-in-law's part, my grandmother's part, which I think was pretty magnanimous of him.
So you have some good memories of your grandmother.
Absolutely, I have good memories of my grandmother.
That's very good.
Yes.
Well, now I want to hear about your mother. What kind of person she was, and what kind of cook she was, and all those things.
Well, I think my mother, it's hard to be objective about your mother, isn't it? I find it hard to be objective about my mother. She was great. She had her social life and her friends, and she was wonderful with Yale and me. I remember when Yale was in the service, she would write him every day. Every day she would write him a letter, and we would take it up to the Council Bluffs post office and mail it. We'd take a little ride in the car, which was a big recreation in those days. And that it had to be every day. So she was wonderful. And then when he was home on I think they called them furloughs or leaves or something, she would always have his friends over, have sort of a party per se, for him, and just be so happy that he was home.
How was she as a cook?
As a cook, well, I think she left most of that to my grandmother in those days. She was a good cook, but she wasn't a terrific cook. I mean, my grandmother did most of that, the exotic Jewish dishes. And my mother was more of just a basic cook. Though in later years, I wouldn't remember my mother for her cooking. It was good, but it wasn't just great. And but she always managed. When I had children and Yale had children, she always had everyone for the holidays, and we had wonderful, set up in the dining room on a Dillon Drive or whatever it was. It wasn't Dillon Drive, it was Hillcrest. And she would have wonderful dinners. and then all the children would play downstairs and they had a rec room downstairs, and the kids would go downstairs and, make a lot of noise. When I was growing up, as I mentioned, my grandmother lived with us, and she would assume a job of nanny, babysitter, whatever they're called these days. And my folks would, mostly on the weekends, a Saturday night was a big night. My father would close the store no matter what time, and they went over to, they had in Carter Lake 2 clubs called the Chez Paris and the Stork Club, and they liked to go over there. My dad liked to shoot craps. That was his big deal. And I guess my mother liked to play roulette, and they did that as one means of recreation. And I don't know, they were there maybe 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know how late those clubs were open. And then I would always complain, well, you're never home. I feel like an orphan, just to throw in a little guilt there. And they enjoyed doing that, and then they had their card clubs, and they look forward to those. And of course, my mother loved to go shopping, and I remember she and I would we shopped at Brandeis downtown a lot, and I remember she would always get dressed, and I would have to get dressed. She would wear hats and gloves and all that, and we would go to Brandeis, and then we would always have lunch in the Pompeian room at Brandeis. And if we had to meet anyone, of course, you met under the clock at Brandeis. And these were just rituals that I guess everybody did. And then if we were shopping and my mother happened to meet one of her friends, she always met someone downtown, we called it, we'd have to stop and talk, and I would just stand there, and she'd, go on and on, 5-10 minutes, and then we'd proceed until another friend showed up, and then we would shop, and then we'd go down and pick up our cars and go home. And that was a day that you definitely look forward to, the shopping downtown. Usually you'd start at Brandeis and go up one side of 16th Street. There were stores along the way up to Howard Street probably, and then you'd cross the street and up to like the Hill Hotel, whatever street that was. Then you'd turn around and you'd come back on the other side of the street, and there were shops on that side of the street, and you had to visit them all, and that's it. And then you came home with hopefully you had purchases, and that made it a good day. If you didn't have purchases, well, it was a waste. You guys, I just want to end this by telling you I love you. And you think of me sometimes. That's it.